Hi, this video is going to give you a crash course in the basics of the community development test for intermediate small banks, covering the type of activities and buckets to get credit and some common examples for each. Now, before you cross the ISB thresholds, all you had to deal with was the lending test, which was your loan to deposit ratio, assessment area concentration, borrower profile, and geographic distribution tests. But separate from all of that, now you have a community development test that requires a lot of dedicated and focused work on your part to pass. The worst part is, if you fail the community development test, you fail CRA no matter what you did on the lending test. You will struggle with this if it's new to you, but rest assured, you are not alone in that struggle. It happens to all of us when we enter this area, so I'm going to break it down at a very high level to get you started and show you the easiest areas and methods to claim community development credit. Of course, there are a ton of other nuanced ways to get community development credit once you get really good. But right now, you're likely just trying to pass your first community development test, so we'll keep it relatively simple for you. Now, this chart shows you the different activities and the different buckets for the community development test. At the top, there are 3 categories of activities that you can get credit for. These are lending, investments, and services. Each of these activities have common ways to get credit, but also common pitfalls on why you won't receive credit. For each activity, there are 4 buckets of qualifying activities. These are affordable housing, community services, economic development, and revitalization and stabilization. One common early point of confusion is that services is an activity type and community services is a bucket, but those are 2 distinct things. However, oftentimes your services activities will be within the community services bucket, so then folks forget that they are 2 distinct things and separate requirements to consider and document for each. It is possible to get credit for every bucket in all 3 activity types, meaning there are 12 broad ways to get credit. Of course, when you get into the nitty-gritty of each of those areas, you can break it down further. Let's start with the affordable housing bucket. Any activity that helps with affordable housing gets credit. This bucket typically isn't your home run hitter from the start as you first start doing this, but as you get more experience and improve specifically your documentation on rentals, you can really ramp it up if you want. So for your lending activity, the low-hanging fruit is when you make a loan to a housing complex that sets aside more than 50% of units for low and moderate income families. You get credit for that. Now, similarly for investments, if your bank does an investment in these developments or buys the tax credits that help the developers get started, you get credit for that also. But admittedly, only banks with specific expertise typically are involved in those tax credit purchases. Lastly, if your staff is on a board or leadership role with an organization, such as Habitat for Humanity, you can get credit for that. Typically, if a loan is HUMD or reportable, you can't get community development credit because it's already counted on the lending test. However, if it is a multifamily housing unit of 5 or more units, this is the only time you get to count that for community development, even though it's counted in the lending test. Now, that's for affordable housing. This means you can go through your LAR looking for those potential community development possibilities when you look for the 5+ units. Next, let's talk about the community services bucket. You receive credit for loans, investments, and services activities that provide community services to low and moderate income individuals. The key here when talking about community services bucket is the activity must primarily serve low and moderate income individuals. A loan to a nonprofit that primarily serves low to moderate income individuals, such as a homeless shelter or a food bank, now that gets credit. Similarly, for investments, if you make an investment in a school district bond that has students whose families are primarily LMI, you get credit. And that's actually probably the most common community service investment in many areas of the country. And most banks use a free and reduced lunch program as a proxy to prove the primarily LMI requirements, but we'll cover that in the next video, how to do that. Now, lastly, for services, if your staff provides their financial or technical expertise to an organization, again, that primarily serves LMI families, you receive credit, such as serving on the board or as treasurer for the homeless shelters or food banks that we just talked about. Now, the next bucket is for economic development activities. For example, a loan to a startup business, such as a restaurant that will create lower moderate income jobs, will receive lending credit. For investments, you can make an investment in a CDFI, or Community Development Fund institution, that promotes economic development. But this isn't all that common for smaller ISBs, to be honest. Now, for services, you might have staff that serve in a leadership role for economic development organizations, such as small business incubators. The majority of activities in economic development tend to be in your lending activities. However, For economic development, there are two tests you need to be sure to pass, and that's a size test and a purpose test. For the size test, any business with gross annual revenues under $1 million already passed the size test. But there are higher standards and thresholds that you can use and should use to ensure you're capturing all qualifying activities. These are thresholds under the SBDC or SBIC programs that you can quickly research online, and we'll show you how to do that in the next video. To pass the purpose test, typically the farmer business must also be creating or retaining jobs for LMI persons or geographies, or be part of a government redevelopment plan. Unlike with the services bucket, it does not have to create primarily LMI jobs. So if you create even a few, you can try to get credit. There are also some other less common ways to pass the purpose test, but let's keep it simple for now. The last bucket is for activities that revitalize or stabilize lower moderate income geographies, or distressed or underserved middle income geographies, or designated disaster areas. This is the only one that really gets sliced and diced even further down you go with all of those or statements. Generally, if an activity helps to attract or retain existing businesses or residents in any of those qualifying geographies, it may be counted in this bucket. However, be careful. For the underserved middle income census tracts, the definition clarifies that the activity helps revitalize or stabilize the area if they help meet essential community needs, including the needs of lower moderate income individuals. So it's not quite as broad as for the LMI or distressed middle income geographies. Examples for this bucket include a loan that helps revitalize a downtown business district in an LMI census tract. Or investment activity would be an investment in a bond that specifically helps revitalize or stabilize an LMI geography. And for services, it would be a staff that volunteers their financial expertise for a community group focused on revitalizing or stabilizing an LMI area. Now back to that underserved geography. An example for that would be a loan to a rural volunteer fire department to purchase a new fire engine. Activities for revitalize and stabilize do not necessarily have to be in those geographies as long as they help revitalize or stabilize them. But typically, they are in or near those geographies we listed. Now that you know the basics about the activity and bucket types, our next video will go through the easiest and most common ways to claim community development credit. And the video after that will tell you the common pitfalls that cause most banks the problems and what you should look out for. Thank you for watching. Giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel is always appreciated. Thank you. Bye.